Good morning, AP Econ students. Mr. Muller here, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about supply and consumer choice. In our last video, we talked about demand and how demand is determined and the factors that will determine it. Today, we're going to be talking about the other side of it. How much are firms able and willing to supply to a market? And then lastly, we're going to be talking about how prices are created when supply and demand come together. Hope you're excited. I'm excited. Let's get started. So let's talk about what supply is. Supply, if we're looking for the technical term, is the quantity of a good that sellers are willing and able to sell at different prices. If you're doing a bake sale, you might be willing to sell 200 brownies, but are you going to be able to sell 200 brownies for a price that you want to actually make a profit? Because remember, you have to spend all this money to produce those brownies. Now, the law of supply says there is a direct relationship, which means as one goes up, the other goes up, between price and the quantities supplied. So as the price of brownies goes up, you're going to want to put more out there. Because, hey, I could be making more money on those brownies. The price is up. I want to put more out there. But if the price starts to go down, well, I'm not going to try and sell as many brownies because I'm not going to be making that much of a profit. So as price increases, the quantity increases. When the price falls, the quantity falls, because at higher prices, profit-seeking firms have an incentive to produce more. You're a business, your goal is to make as much money as possible. When the price is up, you put as much product out there to sell it and make money. So let's talk about some technical terms when we're looking at how to interpret supply charts. A supply table, like a demand table, is how much a firm is willing to produce for particular prices, and it looks like this type of curve. It's the representation of that data. So here's a particular supply graph. We have the quantity of, let's say, cereal that producers are willing to put out in the market and the price of that cereal. Notice when the price of cereal is 5 JD or $5 or 5 euros, supply is pretty high, because you want to put as much of that product out as possible. But as the price goes down, you don't want to put more product out because it's going to be sitting on the shelves and people aren't going to buy it, and you're going to be wasting money. You're losing profit. So that's how the curve works. Just one quick note, market supply, just like market demand, is when you take all the different firms for a particular good or service and you combine them all together, and that graph is market supply, just like market demand. So let's say in this situation, let's talk about some things that will shift this supply curve. So let's say another firm comes in and wants to also produce cereal. What will that do? Think about it. It actually shifts the supply curve to the right. There's actually more supplied at every single price. Remember, it's not going to be going along here. And the increase in supply means that prices didn't change, but there's more cereal being produced because you have another firm that is producing cereal. And so supply has gone up. But let's say, here's the baseline again, that a storm comes and destroys a ton of wheat or rice or whatever they make cereal out of. What's going to happen to the supply then? Well, you're going to have it go to the left. Supply is actually going to go down. The quantity is going to go down, even at all those same prices, because producers can't put as much cereal out there. They're not going to put in, it's not going to follow this original curve, because they're going to want to put that out there for that price. But because you don't have as many materials, you can't put as many supplies out, as much cereal out at any particular price. We would call that supply line 2. So the prices didn't change, but there is less cereal being produced. Now, there are a number of shifters for supply. We talked about a few. I don't need to read these out to you. You are intelligent AP students. You can read that. I will point out just one word of something called a subsidy. So sometimes governments can step in and actually lower the price of a particular good so that more people want to buy it. These are normally staples like bread or eggs or milk. And it's usually to make sure that everyone in the population has a particular quality of life or can have nutritious food. But I don't need to explain the rest. That's pretty self-evident when you look at it. Oh, also, the number of firms in the industry and changes in price don't shift the curve and only causes movement. So just like when we talked about demand, the same rules apply for supply. So let's talk about how supply and demand work together to create a price for that good. So let's say we're still talking about cereal, and there's a particular supply that suppliers will put out for cereal, and there's a demand that consumers will have at particular prices. Remember, as price goes up, demand goes down. As price goes up, supply goes up. So inverse relationship and direct relationship. Now, what's going to happen is at some point when you graph this, there's going to be a point where these two lines will meet. And that becomes what we call an equilibrium price. Now, what that equilibrium price means is that all of the cereal that producers put out will be bought. You don't want to have a shortage for producers, and you don't want to have excess demand where the demand is high but the supply is low. You want to have a situation where everyone who wants to buy cereal can buy the cereal that they want, and that's how the price is determined. So, there's the equilibrium price. So let's say, what happens if the price increases to $4? What situation is going to happen there? Well, in that case, at $4, you have disequilibrium. So you have a particular supply because the price is high, but the demand is not that high. And so what you're going to have is a shortage. You're going to have, not a shortage, an excess of that good. You're going to have cereal sitting on the shelves not being bought. And that's going to affect the producers. And what will happen is they'll start lowering that price until they can sell as much of the product they put out as possible. And so what you have here is called a surplus. And if we're looking at what that surplus was, it's 20, because all you have to say is at 4, here's the demand, and here's the supply, and the surplus is 20 items. What happens if it's 5? Well, if the price is 5, the demand is 10, quantity supply is 50, so the surplus is 40. What if the price decreases to $2? How does that affect the market? Well, at $2, you also have disequilibrium because the demand for the supply for cereal at $2 is 20, but the demand is 50. So a lot of people want that cereal, but there's not a lot in the market. So you would have a shortage. And how much is that shortage? 30. So there's only 20 in the market, but 30 people are not going to get their cereal. So what if it's $1? Well, what's the shortage? It'd be 70 because the demand is 80, supply is 10, so the shortage is 70. So what will always happen in these systems is when there's a shortage, producers will raise the price, and when there's a surplus, producers will lower the price. And these two systems are always going to work together until you have equilibrium. Now, this happens in a very idealized world that doesn't take into account government interference, which rarely happens, and you're playing with a lot of idealized situations. This system doesn't work perfectly, but this interaction between demand and supply happens at some level in almost every economy that exists in the world. So, a couple of terms we need to know here that we saw from this graph. A shortage is when the quantity supplied is less than the quantity demanded, and a surplus occurs when the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded. And when that happens, you'll have price adjustment, which will eventually get you to equilibrium. Now, when the supply or demand curve shifts, you'll have a new equilibrium because conditions have changed for that. So again, I'm not going to read these. You can take a look at, you can just pause this and read this. You are intelligent AP students. We've already mentioned this. And you could do the same for this video. Just pause it. All right, so let's talk about what will happen when supply and demand curves shift. Let's say when demand and supply both increase. So let's say, supply increases to here, demand increases to here. You have a new equilibrium price where they meet in the middle. So if they both decrease, so let's say demand shifts to here and supply shifts to here, new equilibrium price is where they cross. That's how this works. Let's say that demand increases and supply decreases. So supply goes down, say demand goes here, equilibrium's here. And these notes are just saying, anywhere it shifts, these two, this is where the equilibrium price will be set. So that's how supply and demand work together to create an equilibrium price where sellers will sell all the product they put out. And you don't have a shortage and you don't have a surplus. Well, hope you learned something you didn't know before. Thanks for watching.